Rick's firm.
Hey, Rick.
Hi, Greg.
How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for joining us today. Looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Yes. Well, I hope I won't disappoint. I know Tom probably brings in the big names, so I'll try to live up to the high caliber of Ignite's former discussions. You got some good folks.
Yeah. But I want to introduce you to Rick, because Rick's with Witherspoon Kelly. He's a partner there, and Rick is one of Spokane's top securities attorneys, and represents a lot of our emerging companies here in the region on financings and mergers and acquisitions. So
awesome. Nice to meet you, Rick.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Hopefully one of my clients will be sitting across the table from you. We're here one of these days.
I hope so. I hope so. I love Spokane. What I tell everyone that people don't realize is, I'm a huge fan of Crab Louis, and I don't think people realize that the Crab Louis was invented at the Davenport. So now every time I get a chance to go, anytime we're even in the close by, I'm like, we've got to go get a Crab Louis at the Davenport, because they're amazing. And then it's fun, because that's the home, the invention of the Crab Louis was there. So it's, yeah, anyway.
You have all sorts of fun facts about Spokane.
Well, I love Spokane. I spent, yeah. And I love a good Crab Louis. You can't find them that. Like, who would have ever thought that the crab, like, if you ask even people on this call, like, where was the Crab Louis invented? It's not, it's kind of a little nice factoid.
That is one fact I was aware of.
Yeah, Louis Davenport. That's why it's the Louis. Yeah.
It was before my time, however.
Yeah.
And I know I'm getting older, but I wasn't around when he invented it.
You should. Had I come to Spokane, which I would have, gosh, if we weren't during this crazy COVID time, I would. Then I definitely would be. I would be saying, Tom, after this, we're going to go get a Crab Louis.
Well, we're definitely have to find a reason for you to come over to Spokane and take a look at a handful of the early stage companies that we have in not only Spokane, but also Coeur d'Alene and Sandpoint.
Fantastic.
Actually, one of the CEOs of one of the companies here in Spokane that just closed a financing is Steve Helmbrecht. And Steve, are you on the call here? I know you're on the call, but are you listening in?
Yeah, Tom. Hi, Greg. Nice to meet you. Thanks for being on the call today. Really looking forward to it. I'm a fellow tenant here in the Wonder Building, down on the first floor. So nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Steve.
Steve's new company is called Treasury 4, and they are.
Yes, we talked to Treasury 4. That's a fantastic company. I love that idea.
Well, thank you, Greg. I appreciate that. It was really nice to talk to the team. And
yeah, no, I love that. I love that. That's a great idea. Automating the treasury function, fantastic idea. Love it. Yeah, and I know that Paul V and Ben, because we talked about it. I know they really liked what you were doing, or what you are doing.
Andrew, yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. And Tom has been hugely supportive, and just a come full circle. We had a great opportunity to work with Rick Rep and his team as well. So. Worked with the Spokane team and really pleased with it. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I think you're onto something.
Good. Well, it's a few minutes after noon here, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started, because we want to make sure that we start and finish promptly so everybody can get back to their workday. But as everyone knows, we've got Greg Gottesman here, co-founder of Pioneer Square Labs. And Greg is someone I have known dating back to 95 or 96. And when I was raising my first venture fund, and Greg was at Madrona. And Greg is, probably going to say my favorite Seattle area investor. Not only is he wickedly smart, comes up with creative solutions to opportunities and challenges, very value added, but maybe most importantly, just an all-around good guy with a great bedside manner for emerging companies and around the boardroom. Because oftentimes you get into dicey issues, and Greg is always trying to find a good solution in a very constructive way. So very fortunate to have him here today.
Well, Tom, I want to continue the love fest, because so Tom and I started in venture around the same time. And Tom is a little bit, you can't tell this because both of us have gray hair probably now, and he looks so young, but Tom's a little bit my senior, and was really a mentor to me as a young man, and just in terms of how you treat people. You can have tough negotiations. You can have debates about term sheets and other things, but Tom did it in a way that was always super high integrity, and I just learned a tremendous amount from you, Tom. And when we were doing this in the late 90s, as far back as then, all the way up until today. So yeah, you are a real mentor to me, and I really appreciate you saying that. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm flattered that I was able to have an impact on your career. So yes, it's definitely a two-way love fest here. Before we get started, I also want to thank Rick Rep and Witherspoon Kelly. Rick and his firm are sponsors of Meet the Investor, and Rick's on the phone here today. And I think, as most people know, Rick is a very active securities attorney in the region, working with emerging companies on their financings and M&A activities. So thanks to Witherspoon Kelly, and thanks, Rick, for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Rick.
So I'm gonna fire away with a list of interview questions for Greg, but this is meant to be interactive. So if you've got a question, what I suggest is put it in the chat box, and I will call on you at the appropriate time. But please don't be shy. It's really a great resource to have Greg here today. So if there's something on your mind, please chime in. But really, Greg, just to fire away, I think I've already alluded to, you were one of the very early VCs in Seattle. And to start off with, why don't you kind of just give us a thumbnail sketch of your background and academic experience?
My academic experience. Well, I'm a Seattle native, so I'm fourth generation Seattle, and grew up here and went away to school. So went to Stanford, and then did a JD MBA at Harvard. And in between sort of starting in venture, I worked at a couple different places, and came back to Seattle to join a firm called Madrona Venture Group. At that point, we were doing mostly private equity and a little bit of venture. Tom Alberg, who's a partner there, had invested in this internet company called Amazon, and so we started seeing plans. And I was kind of the young guy on the team, and we started seeing plans and started making investments. And that's when I got to know Tom. It was during that time we started making some early investments. And the story about Madrona, not to go into too much detail here, I'm going to change is that they were loaning me money, Tom. I don't know if you know this story either, to make investments in these companies because we didn't have a formal fund. And my loan balance got really large, and probably inappropriately large for it was bigger certainly than my net worth. And I went to the partners, and I said, hey, this isn't going to work out. We've got to raise a fund. I can't keep taking on these loans. And I remember Tom and Paul Goodrich, who's another partner, there, saying, oh, well, if you want to do that, go ahead, see if anyone's interested. And so went out and raised a fund, and that was Madrona Venture Group as it exists today. Had they not been making me loans, probably wouldn't exist, as crazy as that sounds. So,
yep.
So that was in 1999. We raised that formal fund, and then I was there for 20 plus years, investing and starting companies at Madrona. And then while I was at Madrona, I started this company called, a couple companies, but one where I was the CEO, and we can talk about, they have a big operation in Spokane, is Rover.com. Really enjoyed that experience, and also was integral in starting a company called Redfin, which is another local company here, and a couple others. And I thought, hey, could we do this systematically? So I started something called Madrona Labs, which was a studio inside of Madrona. It still exists, but then felt like we could really scale up that effort, or I could scale up a larger effort. And so I did something crazy, which is I left to start Pioneer Square Labs, which is a studio. We spun out so far 28 venture-backed companies, so quite a few. And then we also raised a couple venture funds as well. And so we do early stage investing in, just classic early stage investing across the Pacific Northwest, in addition to having a studio that starts companies that we can invest in as well. About 50% of the funds from the fund go into studio spinouts, and 50% go into having nothing to do with the studio, just standard companies like some of the ones on the phone today. So that's sort of the model. Happy to dig in a little bit more. It is a unique model. We're in the middle of the muck. We're creating companies from scratch. That gives us a lot of insights into some of the tactical ways in which to build companies. About 15% of the startups that have raised capital in the Pacific Northwest over the last 3 years, we started from scratch in our lab. So pretty amazing, prolific thing. And that's a compliment to a bunch of the folks here at PSL.
Okay, we'll dig into that more in a few minutes. But so Rover.com, that was a product of Startup Weekend in Seattle.
Yeah.
But as you alluded to earlier, the inspiration came after your visit to Spokane for a Hoop Fest and an experience you had with finding a sitter for your dog, Ruby. Why don't you just briefly retell that story? Because you told it early on today before everybody was on, but I think it's kind of an interesting factoid related to the starting of Rover and Hoop Fest. Yeah,
well, I mean, is there a better event in the country than Hoop Fest? A more well-organized, incredible event. So when my kids were younger, we would go every year to Hoop Fest and participate, and it was one of the highlights, frankly, of our lives, going to Hoop Fest. It was so much fun, especially if you love basketball, and so well organized, and just being in Spokane with all those other, families and basketball players. Anyway, it's just fantastic. So Rover, Ruby's no longer with us, but we had at that point a dog. This was about 11 years ago, named Ruby, and now we have a dog named Jordy. But Ruby, we couldn't get my parents to watch her. They were out of town, and we couldn't find someone to watch Ruby. So we're like, okay, for this one time, we'll put her, just going to be a short little weekend, and we'll put her in a kennel. So we put her in a local kennel. It's expensive, and it felt frankly terrible. Went to Hoop Fest, but then my son ended up winning his bracket. My youngest son, he no longer he suffers from my size disadvantage, so he no longer plays basketball competitively, but he was pretty good as a little youngster. So they won their bracket, and we were late then coming back on Sunday to pick up Ruby. That we hit some traffic, and we showed up late at the. I called the kennel. I said, "Hey, we're going to show up about 5 minutes late. Can you just stay open so we can pick up Ruby?" They said, "Sure." Of course, when we arrived, it was all locked up. We come the next day, Ruby's got scratches, has kennel cough. It was just a terrible experience. It also, they charged us for the extra day. And so I went to a startup weekend, a little bit later than that, and said, "Hey, I had this experience, going to Hoop. This was on a Friday night. I had this experience going to Hoop Fest, and here's the experience. I bet you there's a neighbor that would have loved to have taken Ruby, would have done it for less money, and it would have been a win-win situation for all of us. Does anyone want to build this over the weekend, this idea?" And that's the founding of Rover. Now it's a couple $1 billion company. It's public, and has done millions and millions of sits, and is the largest pet services company in the in the world. And it started because of a hoop fest. Yeah. Yeah.
Great story. And Rover.com has a presence in Spokane now too, as well.
Yeah, they have most of their customer service operations in Spokane. Yeah.
Great. Well, now let's kind of move on to Pioneer Square Labs. I mean, the studio side of your business is really an interesting model, and one that I don't believe is too commonplace around the country. But how does it actually work? In the studio, you're essentially, incubating your own ideas, but, how do you come up with these ideas? And are they yours, or they kind of come from your network of affiliated entrepreneurs and other individuals?
It's about 50-50 so far. So 50% of the time it's our idea. So take like a Rover type idea. And 50% of the time it's an entrepreneur will come and say, hey, I'm thinking about some ideas really early, want to test it, would love to work with you guys, and let's just be co-founders on this together. And so other times, again, it's we're coming up with the idea, we go and see if we can get traction, and then we'll go and find the right team to lead it. And so it really has been about 50-50 of the
Okay.
I think I want to say something like 15 of the ideas that we spun out, or maybe 14 of the ideas that we spun out have been ours, and 14 have come to us from an entrepreneur will come and bring us an idea. It's expensive for the entrepreneur in terms of if they're coming to us with an idea, but I think 100% of the time that we've spun a company out, it's gotten venture funding. So it takes, it has a great, and we can get to market a lot faster because we have a whole team of developers, designers, business folks, digital marketers, data scientists, and we can get really fast to market and try to go and try to see if we can win. We kill over 90% of the ideas that we start. So we have a sort of a very deep testing capability here, digital testing, but also just people hopping on the phones and calling customers, and then we'll send it out to hundreds of thousands of people, put up landing pages with these ideas, seeing what customers do, and then saying, hey, is there enough there to actually start a company? 9 times out of 10 there isn't, because we've tried it many hundreds of times. We have a good sense for when we actually get customer pull. By the way, this is for B2B and B2C. We've got interesting ways on the B2B side to really target customers and see, is there sort of interest in this idea? But that's, I think, why of the ones we've spun out, 100% of them have gotten venture funded, because we do a lot of testing of the idea to make sure something's going to work before we spin it out and go raise money.
So how do you vet the ideas that you come up with internally? I mean, does the group get together, once a week on a Monday morning or a Thursday beer and pizza session and just start whiteboarding crazy ideas and see which ones might resonate with the group? I mean, how do you, what's the process for even determining which organic idea goes through the vetting process?
Well, let me, instead of just talking at a high level, maybe I'll take you through an idea that the one I'm working on right now. Is that helpful?
Okay.
Keep
Perfect.
this confidential. It's a company called Evergreen. You can go to it right now, ever.green. And this is an idea that I think I had around sort of the fractionalization of shares. So what we've seen in the market is a whole bunch of alternative assets now. You can go and as an individual investor, you can participate and buy them. So for example, as an individual investor, you can go buy a fractional share of artwork. You can buy a fractional share of farmland. You can buy fractional shares of litigation interests. You can buy fractional shares of residential real estate. You can buy fractional shares of almost anything. One thing that, if you're interested in climate and climate change, that you can't buy a fractional share of is renewable energy projects. So if I said, Tom, hey, you care about the environment and people are making incredibly good returns in this area, why don't you go invest in that solar farm or that wind farm, in Texas or somewhere in Spokane or in California or wherever? You'd say, well, how would I do that? And so there's a whole bunch of legal and other complexities, but we thought, gosh, can we democratize the investing in these renewable energy projects, make it available to everyone? By the way, like people are saying, we're going to need about $1 trillion a year to deal with the climate, urgency and climate change issue. Right now, institutional investors put about $80 billion to make a healthy return, but it's only 80 billion. So there is a massive funding gap that we need to somehow solve. I think individuals and retail investors can play a part of that. And so that was an idea. Now, so how do we test it? Well, we start putting up, so we start talking, okay, yeah, that sounds interesting. Maybe I'd be interested in that. I care about the climate. I might want to invest in that. So then we go and we put up an evergreen site like the one that you're on, ever.green. You can go see it. And then we'll just drive traffic to it and see, do we get emails? How many people are clicking? Is it, and then we, what we're looking for on Facebook, for example, is something greater than 1%, hopefully greater than 2% click on a typical ad. This one got about 10%. So crazy interest in this idea. So we're like, okay, there's something here, at least top of the funnel. Now, when you bring them to the page, will they give you their email? We're looking for about a 10% conversion once they come to a page. So we're trying to figure out, is our customers interested in this idea? We can do this B2B, B2C, on anything, right? So then the answer was absolutely with this idea. There was a lot of interest. So now we've got to go find a team. And so we felt like on the demand side here, there was real potential, but on the supply side, we had some issues. I don't know people that are doing renewable. I mean, this is not my background to know folks that are doing large renewable energy projects. And so we recruited a CEO, got introduced to this incredible CEO named Chris Ookster, who was the COO of the largest publicly owned utility in the country. And he's from Texas. And he was a partner at McKinsey before that, where he did, he was the technology and energy partner at McKinsey. Got incredible connections into the supply side. And so now he's the CEO. We've spent about 6 months working, right before he joined, but he's joining now. There's a little bit of there, and we're going to go try to start a company together. So that's how this can work. Yeah.
Okay. And you must have teams of people within Pioneer Square Labs that are knowledgeable and skilled, in sales and marketing and development and the other aspects of evaluating an idea. I guess, how many people do you have that are kind of dedicated to the early stage analysis of something like evergreens or evergreen?
Yeah, the way we do it is we've got about, we toggle a little bit depending on the time. We have roughly 25 folks, and we have all those folks, we have, former CTOs, former heads of marketing, former, Jeff Entrus, who is a big investor in a bunch of stuff, and Lee Sandler and TAs, a bunch of folks have started different companies and been investors. So we've got a team with both tactical and strategic skills. What we would do, let's just take this example. So I was the partner on it. We had a project lead named Andrew Freeman, who's fantastic. And then we had some we have a full-time designer who was designing, like you can see, the Evergreen site, and was designing a bunch of the sort of the tests and other things like that. And then we had a digital marketer who's been doing a bunch of the digital marketing tests. And we were sort of a pod, if you will, and we've just been working it. And again, 9 times out of 10, we'll kill an idea as quickly as we can. But in this case, it kept going, and now we have Chris on, and we're going to continue to work with him. But we also have a full-time recruiter who's working with him to put sort of a world-class team together to go and attack this. He can bring folks on the supply side of this equation, and we're going to bring folks on more on the demand side. So that's an example of a kind of idea that we would work on.
Got it. And are there similar models to Pioneer Square Labs around the country, or are you and your firm very unique in this regard?
I think there are some. I mean, it's a newer model. I mean, Idea Lab back in our day, if you remember, was a sort of a similar kind of concept. And then there are others like High Alpha, which does B2B SaaS, is a wonderful studio. There's Atomic. There's a bunch of folks. Ooh, someone just brought me a pastrami sandwich. I'm like, I'm in heaven. There's a bunch of other studios that do this kind of work, but it's definitely it's a small percentage of venture.
Okay.
Built this way. My sense is that the venture model works beautifully, but it wasn't. I think sometimes venture capitalists feel like the model, like when Moses brought the 10 commandments down from Mount Sinai, he also brought the 2 and 20 model and the venture capital model and said, thou shalt always do startups one particular way. And that's just not an entrepreneur. In order to build $1 billion company, an entrepreneur must have come up with the idea that was one of the commandments. It wasn't.
Yep.
So, I started myself some $1 billion companies using this model. So it can be done. It's not going to replace venture, the traditional venture model. It's just another piece of a puzzle, and I think another part of a healthy ecosystem.
Yep.
Just like accelerators, like Y Combinator and Techstars and those sorts of things are new concepts. 20 years ago, people were like, oh gosh, you give up 6%, you're giving of course, can we admit that Y Combinator has been a good thing for the venture ecosystem? I think it has. Same with Techstars.
Yep.
I think studios are also just a part and a complementary part of an ecosystem. But that's why we also raised a fund, because what we are trying to do is find the very best entrepreneurs in the Pacific Northwest and back them in whatever way makes the most sense. So if you're an entrepreneur that has an idea and is looking for traditional venture capital relationship, fantastic. We would love to talk with you. And we're starting companies in real time. And so we have a lot, in addition to our own insights that we can give you on a board, but we're in the middle of we are incredibly powerful digital marketers, customer acquisition marketers. So we can bring a lot more to the table than a typical venture capital, because we're building ourselves.
Yep.
And so you could have a traditional relationship with us, that's fine. If you're a great entrepreneur, you're like, I don't have an idea, but I'm ready to go and start. Then we might have something that's perfect for you, like for Chris Oogster, for example. He didn't have an idea, but he was ready to be an entrepreneur. Have that be a chapter. It's like we had something. Or if you have an idea and you're like, gosh, it's so early, I want to test it, I'd like to partner with you. Maybe that's another discussion. We just want to work with great entrepreneurs, take what both of us decide is a fair sort of split, and so that's the way we do it. And whether that's sort of traditional venture or more on the studio side, we're kind of indifferent.
Okay, and so you gave a great example of one you incubated in-house, Evergreen, and the question I'm going to ask is on the venture side of PSL. When people or a team comes to you, they probably have a relatively I guess I'm asking the question. I'm assuming they kind of have somewhat of a relatively refined pitch, but when people come to you on the studio side from outside with an inorganic idea, are they just kind of calling up and saying, hey, Greg, I have this idea. I'm looking for assistance in vetting it. I guess the question I'm asking is, on the studio side, the ideas that come to you from the outside must be in a much less polished form than on the venture side.
I think that's generally true, not always. Sometimes someone comes to us and they've got a little bit of a pitch. I mean, gosh, it's so early these days when things are getting funded, so it's hard to know what's polished and not, Tom. But yes, generally, I think what you're saying is true. That generally, when someone wants to partner with us, someone's looking for a co-founder, then we we'll hop in and do the pitch and go help them raise money. And we also, by the way, we'll fund. So typically before a company spins out, we'll put in anywhere from 150 to as much as, $750, $1,000 before we spin something out. And that's cash, that's hard cash that we're using to invest in. For example, an entrepreneur might say, hey, I need I want to be an EIR. So we'll pay the entrepreneur while he or she is working with us. We'll pay for other team members. Potentially we'll pay our own, folks to continue to work on something it could be for many months before we spin something out. So there's a cash component to that too. In addition, but we don't sort of, in our model, we don't sort of, it's not like then we're sort of keeping track and that becomes preferred. We're just taking that ultimately in common. And then ultimately then we'll go help try to see if we can raise some outside funding, which we've been very successful at. So we've had over 50 firms have invested now in PSL spinouts.
Amazing. We're starting to get a couple of questions here. Katrina Rogers, you have a question?
Absolutely. Thanks, Tom. And thanks, Greg, for giving us the lowdown on your organization, on the studio. You mentioned that it's expensive for an entrepreneur to bring an idea to the studio. How expensive?
Yeah, well, I mean, the answer is it depends. How developed is it? Is it kind of like what Tom was saying, where it's like, oh, I've got this idea. There's no customers, there's no traction. You just want to sort of test it. And I'd like to work with you. And let's say we test it and we decide, hey, there's something here. We might want to build this. Then oftentimes what we'd say is, hey, let's just split it 50-50. We'll be co-founders together. And we'll go help get you to that point, and we'll just sort of split it. Other times, if there's if someone comes to us and there's more traction, then we've gone as little as 10% and as high as I think the high is in one case where we had a tremendous amount of traction. I think we took 70%, the CEO took 30%. So that's the stuff. But I would say most often it's sort of like, hey, let's just go in this as co-founders together and we'll just split it. And then be sort of aligned that way. And then together we'll take dilution for an option pool. Together we'll take dilution for, for additional employees. Together we'll take dilution for the investors that come in. And then also our fund does put in up to $1 million. But for that piece of it, not for the studio side of sort of at spin out, then the fund does put in additional funds that is typically in what we call what's a undiscounted uncapped note. So it's very attractive money, and the studio gives some of its founding shares to the fund in return for that very attractive piece of financing. So that we have a whole bunch. It's sort of a well-oiled machine at this point. Is that helpful? The answer is it depends, but most of the time it's sort of like a 50-50 split with the CEO.
Great, thank you.
Excellent. And then Rick Rep, you had a question?
Yes, thanks, Tom. So Greg, you mentioned the staff. At one point you said sometimes you even pay the staff to work for these companies as they spin out for a while. I'm curious if your model allows for some of your staff to cycle out of PSL, work full-time with these companies because they really fell in love with the product or service and that's what they want to do. And then, have you had any examples where people have cycled back into PSL after there's an exit, for example? And how does your compensation model allow for that, affect that? I'm curious how that works.
Yeah, completely encourage that. If one of our folks, and it's happened a bunch of times, where someone who's working on a project will fall in love. It's sometimes with the idea, but a lot of times it's with the entrepreneur that's leading it. I mean, this is, they just think, hey, this is a wonderful entrepreneur, and I like this idea, and this is the idea. So sometimes they'll come to PSL because they don't have sort of that specific startup they want. They want to go test run a couple startups, and then they'll find one they love, and then they'll go and work with them. We've had that happen numerous times. And yes, we're structured so that if you leave, let's say you've only been with us for 6 months, then we'll just vest you up to that point. We wouldn't sort of say, hey, there's a year cliff and you didn't make the year cliff. We'll just sort of say, we'll vest you up until that time, and then you'll go and have a separate relationship with with this new company. And have people come back. No one's come back yet. We're still relatively early. We're only 6 years, we're about 6 years old. So, but I assume some will come back over time. And, but we've had numerous folks, start with us, help to build a company, and then go and be a sort of a fellow co-founder with a CEO and leave with it. And that's been on the design side, on the marketing side, and on the on the software engineering side.
So, Greg, you're one of your sources of capital for PSL is other venture funds, which is somewhat unique. Because typically venture funds are just investing in their own opportunities. So I guess my question is, what's the motivation? And many of the venture funds are many of the leading ones in the country. Well, what is their motivation for investing in essentially another fund?
Yeah, they're not investors in the fund; they're investors in the studio. To be clear.
Okay.
So our fund has no venture cap. So our just to separate this. So those are two separate entities. We have a studio, and then we have funds, and they're completely separate sets of investors. We do have some overlap, but not a huge amount. And so the fund side is just traditional fund investors like endowments, institutions, very high net worth individuals, and so forth. And then the studio is VCs and angels. And so our goal in the beginning when we did the studio, Tom, was because it was a new model, and because I knew that having done this already, having started Madrona Labs and having run into this problem when we were trying to spin out companies from Madrona Labs, I knew that we would have an issue where VCs would say, hey, like, I don't know I don't know if I like a studio taking equity, just like frankly Techstars and Y Combinator had earlier. I don't know if I like that. What's that on the cap table? That looks different. And so what the goal was to try to get as many VCs and angels in as we possibly could. So my goal is anyone who ever led a deal in the Pacific Northwest, I wanted to have them as a small investor in our studio. And so we went out and I had worked as a venture capitalist with a lot of them. So I said, hey, like, I don't want a lot of money. I want a little bit of money. And what I really like to do is put money in these companies when they spin out. And so for the first 10 spin outs that we had, all of those 10 spin outs got money from those 13 or 14, because Bain came in later, but like from those original sort of 13 VCs that we had, in addition to a bunch of the angels, we had about, I want to say about 60 angel investors as well. So all of that initial money came from that group. Now, as it's matured, so the last 18 or so has been, much broader as the model has sort of proven itself, and there's now more studios. Tom, to your question earlier, now we have VCs who, a much broader set of VCs that are investing in the companies. But early on, it was helpful to have people kind of bought into the model as a way to sort of kick it off. So it was a strategic way, and if people are fundraising, always think about, gosh, as I'm fundraising, I'm going to get money, but what else am I going to get in addition to money from these dollars? And I was thinking, hey, I need folks that are going to ultimately support these companies more in many ways than I need the money. And that's sort of why it sort of started that way. Do they have any legal right, any of these folks to, legal right to sort of invest in these or get first look? No, there's no, although we do communicate regularly with them. And so, and they may be more predisposed because they know us well, but there's nothing legal that sort of gives them entitlement to any companies. They do have an interest in all of the, in the founding equity of all these companies through their investment in Pioneer Square Labs. Yes.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
Yeah. Was there a question there? No, that's helpful. If you had any channel conflict, so to speak, where companies are coming out and it's there's a lot of interest, and you have a couple of the investors in the studio side, competing with each other to lead the round.
Yes, but in those cases, and in all cases, the entrepreneur decides, not PSL. And so
Okay.
we're very clear about who's running the ship. And one of our principles is that we work for the CEO that we bring in. I work for that person. Everyone at PSL works for that person. That person is the decision maker. You don't ever want to have a situation where someone comes in and says, I don't think I want to work that extra hour. This is PSL's thing anyway. So we're very adamant about who's in control, who works for whom, who makes these kinds of decisions. And so ultimately, it's going to be that co-founder with us. It's going to make the decision on who is going to lead that run. Now, are they interested in our opinion about different investors and having worked with some of them before? Who's going to add what kind of value and what kind of way? Absolutely. But ultimately, it's that person's decision.
Yep. So it sounds like a great formula, and I'm pleased. I'm a small investor in one of your companies, Secure, which came
Love
out
that
of,
company. Yeah, that's a good one, Tom. That's a good one to be an investor in.
Well, it was a pretty easy decision for me because the idea resonated quite quickly.
Yeah.
And I actually saw they had some sort of press release or LinkedIn post yesterday about the level of traction they're getting with the companies that have, or the level of adoption they're getting within the companies that have signed up for the Secure platform.
So we can talk about that one. So that was one, which is at the other side of the model. Evergreen was one that was an idea that we came up with. This was an idea that was brought to us by Devin, right, and Bassam.
Yep.
And they came and said, hey, we've worked with you guys before. So they had worked with Jeff and TA, not with me, but some other folks, some of my other partners who are much more talented and better than I am at all this stuff. So they had worked with and they wanted to work again with Jeff and with TA and stuff. And so we said, and they, hey, we got this idea around emergency savings accounts, but we don't even know if it's a good idea. And so we then, put a team on it and went about testing that idea, and really found that, wow, there was a real need for these emergency savings accounts. This is like, essentially think of instead of a 401k, this is something that could be matched by your employer, but would be used for an employee that has an emergency. Maybe it's a medical emergency, maybe the car breaks down. And most folks in the United States, if they get like a $700, $800 emergency, like they're in big trouble. And a whole bunch of bad things spiral out of control. So this emergency savings account idea, especially if it's matched by the employer, it can be a real win for the employer and for the employee. And it's a fantastic sort of, it's called Secure. If you want to go see it, securesave.com. I think it's securesave.com, but it's a wonderful company. One of the things that we did is we had a relationship with Susie Orman. We had a relationship through a talent agency. And so we were talking to them about, hey, how do we get some of this talent involved? And in this case, Susie Orman was one of their clients. So we introduced Secure to Susie Orman. Susie Orman is considered like the leading financial, you've seen her on like MSNBC a bunch and NBC, and she's like the financial guru of America or something. So, and she's fantastic. And so we introduced her and she said, hey, I've been asked for 20, 30 years to join boards, to be a co-founder, and I've never said yes, but this idea is basically my life's work. I'm in. So she's a co-founder with Devin and Bassam. We sort of helped to sort of put that together, and she's been fantastic, and that company's really taken off. So we're really excited about that one, but that was one credit to Devin and Bassam bringing it to us. We did a bunch of testing. We're like, wow, there's something really here. Help them to put together that, bring another co-founder in that could be really great. And off it goes. And I think that's going to be hopefully a really good investment, Tom, for all of us.
Yep. Well, I'm delighted to be in it. Hey, well, one question I meant to ask earlier, but I failed to do so is, obviously you're investing at very, very early stages, but are there particular industries or geographies that you're focused on?
Yeah, love the Pacific Northwest. So 100% of our investments so far have been in the Pacific Northwest. We do have companies that start here and then will move. So we started a company. I teach entrepreneurship at the University of Washington. I have about 22 years. This was actually a team. Part of it came from this class that I've been teaching. It's the first time I've ever done it, but there's an exceptional group of folks who are from Latin America. And then we partnered them with a CEO who Julie Sandler knew well because her husband worked with this gentleman. And so anyway, that's a company, for example, based in Mexico City, but it was incubated here in Seattle. So all the companies tend to start here in Washington State and then move out. Very interested in Spokane. COVID's been tough. It's been tough, frankly, personally. It's been tough on our model, just to be frank, because I think part of this model requires it's the stuff that happens in between meetings that's more valuable than the stuff that happens in meetings.
That's
Especially
a very astute observation.
Yeah, especially in a studio. Most of the best ideas aren't like, hey, let's sit and have a meeting about it. It's like you're sitting around after a lunch, or you're sitting around a desk, and it's very sort of serendipitous, and you lose that over Zoom, and we've lost that. And so typically we would spin out about 6 or 7 companies a year. This year we'll do probably 3 or 4. So we're about 50% less. And I think, and if someone said, how much of that is due to COVID? I would say all of it. Because it's just, we're not as efficient. We can't work with those entrepreneurs who are coming and EIR sitting around us and building ideas. And so we've all now come back to the office. Some folks have reasons. For example, they have small kids and aren't vaccinated. There are reasons, but we're back in the office, most of us, as of the last couple of weeks. And it's just been a dramatic acceleration of everything that we're doing. And I missed it hugely. I'm so happy to be back.
So that kind of addresses geography. You'll love the Pacific Northwest, and we might dive into Spokane here in a few minutes. But what about what about industry preferences?
Yeah. So we tend to so anything software related, internet related, marketplace related. I mean, we tend to have certain things that we like. We don't hardware, although we've done some, is a little bit tougher for us. It just takes longer, doesn't work quite as well with the studio model. We'll look at it from the fund side and from the studio side, but that's a little bit harder for us. Yep. About 2/3 of the companies that we've done have been B2B, 1/3 B2C. So slight preference for B2B, but we'll also look at consumer stuff as well. My sense on consumer is, you've got to have, so remember how I was talking about testing and sort of like, okay, you put something up on Google or Facebook and you just see what customers tell you.
Yep.
I feel like consumers, I want to see a slightly higher hit rate because they're harder to convert once you get them to a page than businesses, and they tend to be a little more fickle. So we'll look at consumer stuff, or B2B stuff. We do have some trends that are important to us, and so obviously anything that's sort of machine learning, AI related tends to be of interest to us. We're looking at one of the things that PSL does especially well is legacy business. So, for example, we like to take old industries and automate them. So we've done that with title insurance. We've done that with the registered agent business. We've done that with the debt collection business. We've done that with, on and on and on. We've done a bunch of companies where we'll take older industries that maybe require some automation and then try to automate that. So that we have themes like that that are of interest to us, but we're open to looking and talking to anything. The most important thing for us is finding, great entrepreneurs that want to work with us.
Yep. What about healthcare, medical?
Yes. Absolutely. I have several companies in the healthcare space. It's a really messed up space. And so we've got a great company called Kavala, Kavala.care. In fact, the CEO has been trying to get a hold of me during this meeting. I've noticed he's pinging me, so I got to call him as soon as we're done here. But Kavala was a fantastic entrepreneur that approaches, and together what I love about healthcare. So this is this fantastic entrepreneur named Todd Owens. And we were doing just looking at this idea. We went into one of these healthcare facilities, and we're in a room like this, and I hear a sound in the background. I said, "Is that a fax machine?" And someone said, yes, we do most of our, connections with our employees through fax. And I was like, that's an opportunity. Anytime you hear a fax machine, bills should go up, opportunity. So there's just a lot I mean, healthcare can be tough, though. It has some issues with it,
Yep.
but there's just a lot of problems to solve, meaty problems to solve. So we're interested at least in exploring that for sure.
Well, we have a number of healthcare related startups in our community, because as you know, Spokane produces more medical students than Seattle. So there's a real concentration on healthcare talent in the Spokane region.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, very interested in it. And we've done several investments. And then T.A. McCann, who's one of my partners, who's fantastic. Yep. He almost focuses exclusively on digital health. So that's like his area of focus. He's been the CEO of some companies in that space. He's invested in that space. And he's specifically on like digital health applications. He's sort of I think one of the best people you could ever talk to about that. Even if he doesn't invest, you'll learn a lot, because he's sort of looks at everything, has done a bunch of stuff both on as an investor and an operator.
Perfect. Well, I will keep that in mind. In the remaining minutes here, I kind of do want to transition to our region, Spokane. And when I think about it as Spokane, Coeur d'Alene, and Sandpoint, kind of a triangle here. And kind of during the pandemic, it has really experienced a lot of growth and outside interest. In the front page of the Wall Street Journal a few months ago, they listed the cities that were attracting the most growth, and Coeur d'Alene was #1 and Spokane was #5. And I welcome growth like that. As you know, I've been a big proponent of the region.
Yeah, you're Mr. Spokane, Tom. I can
But I kind of like, but sometimes I got to be careful about drinking my own Kool-Aid. So I'd be kind of be interested in your candid maybe observations on the attributes of this community to entrepreneurs, and maybe any input that you might have, how we could maximize the continuing recruitment of entrepreneurs and tech companies and startups.
Yeah, I mean, I think Spokane is a great place for a startup, and at Madrona, and then I know my partner Jeff, both individually and then while at Madrona, invested in some really successful companies in the Spokane area, and so totally a believer in it. And we talked about earlier Treasury Forward. What a great start that we looked at and we're excited about. So. We'll continue to do that. I think now with COVID behind us, I think it's helpful because we're close, to just make some trips too, come and visit y'all, and get my crab Louie at the Davenport, which is my favorite. So what do I think is strong? So, and I know Rover has a large operation in customer service as well. I think the difference between Spokane and Seattle, just because I know those two markets relatively well, or the Valley even, is the engineering talent in Seattle is stronger than Spokane. And so one of the things that makes Seattle special is we've got these $2 trillion companies that have been recruited a lot of talented engineers. And if you believe that for a lot of these startups, engineering is sort of at the heart of some of these startups, then Seattle's kind of has a good sort of has a good number of engineers. Now they're expensive, but that would be the biggest sort of difference, I would say, between the two areas in terms of startups, is that Seattle just has more engineering talent than Spokane. But I think, when it comes to business talent or in the healthcare space, other things, I think Spokane can be fast and can leverage both its own engineering talent as well as the talent from the Seattle area and elsewhere to sort of build great stuff. But I mean, I'm a huge huge fan of Spokane, would be 100% open to investing in a company there. And I think part of trying to figure out on the recruiting side is can you figure out with all this, people now can sort of live wherever they want. Can you get more of some of these engineers to come and move to Spokane?
Yep, that is certainly one of the bigger challenges here is, because I mean, most of the companies that I'm involved with here all have a large number of openings for developers and engineers. And probably one of their biggest struggles is finding that talent. So it's something that
everywhere that's an issue. But maybe that's also an opportunity too. Someone said, what does Spokane do better? I think Spokane has a better, lifestyle, advantage. And so you can go, I know folks that have moved to Spokane to say, it's a great size city. Here I am in the middle of Seattle. I mean, we've got some real issues here in Seattle. Real issues around crime, homelessness, shootings. I mean, there's some issues. And we've got this wealth gap that is continuing to just create a lot of issues. And so if you have a family and are thinking about starting a family, Spokane is a fantastic, and you're looking for a little bit, a community that has a little bit more together than almost anywhere else on the planet. Like Spokane is a fantastic place for that.
Yep. The quality of life advantage certainly is very clear. And, most of the people that are have found their way here recently, that's what they point to. The lakes, the mountains, the golf courses, the schools, the neighborhoods. But the engineering talent is one that we do need to solve. In just the last couple of minutes here, based on your background as a very active and successful investor and having started companies, if you had to kind of synthesize down a couple of pieces of advice to a budding entrepreneur, what would it be?
Gosh, I have a couple of pieces of advice, but maybe I'll just do one and then make sure that if you've got other questions. So what I'm always looking for and focusing our team on is, what can you be best in the world at? Can you be best in the world at something? And it doesn't have to, I think the problem that people have is they think too big. You don't have to be best at the world at something really big, but you have to be best in the world at something. And you can have a big vision and say, hey, for example, I am going to go and I'm trying to think of a company that we've talked to. I'm going to go and I want to do this idea around making investments available to the masses. And so instead of focusing on every single possible type of person, you sort of go, okay, if you are a non-accredited investor looking for things in solar, like we are, we're the best in the world at something like that. So anyway, the more narrow you can be, you can have a big vision, but then going down into something that you can win and really declare almost out of the gate as early as possible that you can really win something, be best in the world at something. That's a really key thing. Because when I'm done with a meeting or thinking about one of our companies, if I don't know what you're best in the world at, then it's probably not interesting.
Yep. And a perfect example of that is one of the very first companies you and Tom Alberg invested in, and that is Amazon. And, Jeff came out and said, I'm going to focus on books and get really good at that. And once I figure that out, then sell everything. And, I use that example all the time. Be good at something and then prove that and expand. We have one last question here, if you have time, from Carter. Carter, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious from an investment standpoint, how you consider investing in companies that are co-located versus companies that are fully remote at this point.
So what is what your definition of co-located?
All right, everybody in the same city, same office every day.
Yeah. It depends. So I think both can work. I think the fully remote, again, in the same way that I feel like we've lost when you're early on, I think you do lose something in terms of culture building. So now, if you're fully remote and you guys have all worked together before for 4 or 5 years and you have a culture, an established culture, then that can work totally fine. If it's like from the beginning, we're fully remote and we have all these people, and it has worked, so there are exceptions, but I think that can be very difficult to really build that strong culture. So personally, I prefer to have at least some, if you're going to be fully remote, at least have some plan for how you're going to get together and how you're going to build that culture, and how you're going to have those serendipitous moments, and how you're going to, because people, when they join a company or leave a company, it's typically not about compensation or upside. It's typically about the other people. And so it's hard to form a relationship with you, Carter, over Zoom. I mean, it's fine. You look like a great guy, but like it's something, if we're in person, having a Crab Louie at the founding place of the Crab Louie, like we're going to have more of a connection. And I think for employees that also matters. It's those in-between moments, those serendipitous moments, those moments where you can talk not just about work, but about what's going on in someone's life, and you can show that you are empathetic and you care. So if you're going to be fully remote, then I'm going to ask you, what's your plan for how you're getting together at least, somewhat regularly, so you can sort of build that strong culture together. Personally, I think if you're in an office and you're hybrid, you're like, hey, people are coming in 3 days a week, 4 days a week, but then they're working at home because they've got some issues. I prefer that better, but we'll see how this sort of evolves. We're all kind of learning as we go here. By the way, I did see people sending me direct messages and other things like that. And then as soon as we get off this, I'll lose all those messages. So send me an email if you're interested in connecting to greg@psl.com. So just think pumpkin spice latte, but it's actually Pioneer Square Labs. Greg, Greg, 1G @psl.com. And I'm happy to respond from that.
Perfect. And it is 1 o'clock and you've been getting messages on your phone. You have a pastrami sandwich there. So we're going to conclude, but delighted to have you here today. Love hearing more about Pioneer Square Labs, and very hopeful that we can find an opportunity or two for you in Spokane. And maybe the next step is, when everything kind of freezes up, have you come to Spokane, meet some of these companies over a Crab Louie at the Davenport.
I would do that in a heartbeat. Tom, anytime Tom asks me to do something, I'll do it. So so you've got that going for you for sure. So
well, thank you.
So great to talk to all of you, and look forward to meeting sometime soon.
Excellent. And then just one last thing before we conclude. Our next event, Ignite Talks, is with Fritz Wolf, who is certainly one of the real estate and prop tech leaders in our community, and that will be on November 10th at 5:30. So I think Fritz will be an outstanding speaker. He doesn't do many of these events, so it'll be a great opportunity to meet Fritz. But with that, thanks again, Greg. Thanks for everybody else, and we're going to find a way to get you to Spokane and meet some of these companies.
Sounds great. I'm game. So great to see all of you, and have a great rest of the week.
Perfect. Thank you all. Signing off.